What's up, everybody? Welcome to Make Things Tiny. My name is Mick, and today's video is all about off-grid tiny house living. I'm talking to Kristine. Kristine is a tiny house dweller who lives off-grid in their tiny house in Canada. They're going to talk about their story, how they went tiny, why they went tiny, and dispel some of those myths around off-grid tiny house living. So this is a great video for you if you have some questions or you've just been curious about what it looks like in life when you live off-grid in a tiny house. Before I get into the video, I just want to take a second to thank the sponsor for this video. This video is sponsored by Mac Insurance Inc. Mac Insurance is a premier tiny house insurance company based out of Oregon. They're actually the only company that offers a complete homeowner's insurance policy for a tiny house, specifically designed for your tiny house. So whether it's your primary, your secondary, or it's a long or short-term rental like an Airbnb, they've got you covered. So please do take the time to check out the website. Here in the video description for this video, reach out to them, ask questions, and get insured. So thank you so much, Mac Insurance. And then also, if you're new to the channel, please take a moment to subscribe. It helps me out a lot. Tap that notification bell so you find out when I drop new videos. I drop new videos every single week. All right, let's talk about off-grid tiny house living, guys. All right, I'm here today with Kristine. Kristine, thank you so much for joining me on the channel, being willing to talk about your experience. Do you mind talking just a little bit about your background, what kind of got you interested in tiny houses?
Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here. What got me to go tiny? I guess I'll start off by saying tiny homes aren't really my thing. They never were, but life kind of happened, and I ended up in the situation where I was in a tiny home. Like many of us, we were all affected by the pandemic and the lockdowns. I had a wellness clinic in downtown Toronto in Canada, and when they locked everybody down, we weren't able to practice. Nobody was able to make an income. The landlords for the businesses weren't really trying to help us out. So when we ended up having to just go home and sit there for a while, nothing was coming in, and it got really tough financially. Also, I noticed that they were putting up a lot of the 5G towers, which were giving me really bad headaches. And people were upset, people were angry, people were confused, depressed and sad. And I think that energy that was floating around from people like that was affecting me as well. And on top of that, because I'm Asian, I did receive some, I guess, hostility about having the China virus and me infecting everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So that was all of those reasons were the reason why I felt like I needed to create space for myself and to have distance. So I don't even know how it happened. I just kind of was online on Kijiji, like looking for something else. Forget what it was now. But then I saw this ad to volunteer on a farm, and it sounded really great. So I checked it out, and I really liked it. I made sure my family came with me, and we all thought it was a good idea. And I started volunteering on the farm, and the farmers really liked me. We're all very like-minded people, and they said, we really like you. We would love if you want to stay. If you want to stay, you can, but you need to have your own place to live, and it needs to be off-grid. So that's how I ended up looking into going tiny.
It's a really cool way to end up in a tiny house, though. But I think it does sort of speak to what a lot of people experienced during the pandemic, just trying to think about how to live their lives differently or slow down. And it's a huge jump to go from like Toronto, which is a pretty big city, and like losing your business, like your clinic, to like living on a
Yeah.
farm, and then being like being off grid as well too. But
Yeah.
however
Yeah.
you get there. So I think that's really great, and you seem really happy with your experience going tiny so far. Like, what's it been
Yeah.
like for you, especially since it wasn't something you originally planned to do?
Mm-hmm. Um, well, it's hard. It's been hard, and it's been an adjustment. I think the thing that a lot of people don't think about is that when you're, especially if you're going to live off out of the city, most of the time when you want to have a place to park your tiny home, it's just like raw land, bare.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of preparation needs to go needs to happen in order for you to put your house down on that land. So there were um, a lot of preparation, a lot of setup that I'm still doing up to this day to make sure that my house is sound and stable on that land, and that I have all the power I need, um, and that I'm comfortable. So that was a big challenge. Um, but I think I've got the hang of it now. So yeah, it's been tough, but very rewarding for a city girl who wears used to wear her high heels all day to someone who's wearing, rain boots all the time and shoveling stone and getting dirty. It's a very big change, but I didn't realize how much I needed to get into nature and how much I needed to have that kind of grounding experience to like I don't know, just to become one with everything around me. It's a very different experience.
Mhm. No, that makes sense, and I think it's a big sort of like issue for a lot of us living in cities that we're not even always aware of how much just living in an environment where you're not exposed to trees as much, you're not getting out and walking as
Mhm.
much, you're not exercising in that same way. Because
Yeah,
when you're living in a city, especially even if you work from home, like you just kind of feel like work, you just want to work and you don't think to go outside. So I think that that's a big one with tiny houses, like getting people back
yeah,
into nature where like you can slow down and maybe just spend more time by yourself. Like when you're in an urban environment, you're surrounded by
yeah,
people constantly. People and noise are like the biggest ones.
yeah,
So I think that's really
yeah,
great.
yeah.
Who did you find to build your tiny house? Who ended up building it for you?
The company that built my tiny home was called True North Tiny Homes, but they have
Mhm.
since, I believe, they've gone out of business now.
Okay.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about the design for it? Like, especially since like it wasn't something you were thinking of doing. Like, what did you end up choosing? Like, in terms of like the sizing for it. Like, were there any sort of like challenges or like learning experiences and just like creating it and designing it yourself?
Yeah, well, like I said, tiny spaces aren't and weren't my thing. So
Hmm.
I wanted to have the most space that I could. So I just went for the 40 foot, like give me the biggest one you can give me. And in Ontario, there are all these building code regulations. So we can't have a
Hmm.
sleeping loft or anything like that. So my
Oh
and I
wow.
don't take
Okay.
it back. I think it's great to have the bedroom on the ground floor. So I have that. I needed to make sure that I created as much visual space as I could. So the way I place my front door, all of the windows, I have a lot of windows. I chose all white, like everything was white. No handles, no nothing. So it just gives the illusion of expansion.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I made sure to do
That's
that.
smart.
And
I think. Yeah.
yeah.
That's
Go ahead.
smart to like just think like just go big. Like it makes sense. If you know you're not going to be comfortable in a really, really small space, like probably don't choose like a 20 by 8.5 foot tiny house. Like so I think that that's smart that you went in for like the 40 footer. Are you enjoying being in the tiny like house, like the space right like as it is? Or do you feel like it's like something that's giving you the opportunity to be more connected to nature because like you are off grid and it's probably easier to be off maybe it's a little bit easier to be off grid in the environment that you're in.
Um, yeah, I love my tiny home. I think I did a great job
Mhm.
at designing it to give the illusion of space, like I said. I You don't need more than, 10 foot wide, 40 long. Even if I had
Yeah.
like a 20-foot tiny home and I had sleeping lofts, that probably would have made a big difference. But because you
Hmm.
can't do that in Ontario, I went for something bigger.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I really enjoy the space, and yeah, I do feel like I get cooped up sometimes. So
Hmm.
in between clients during the day, I'm always going outside. I have a greenhouse in the yard, tending to my plants and just getting some fresh air. It's important. And I find that
Yeah.
I need to do it now. It's become a habit to like get out there and do something, even if it's just go
Mhm.
for a walk.
Yeah. No, it's great. I think when you're like, I mean, and you're sitting on a property that's like constantly reminds you that, it's gonna be good for you if you go outside. So that probably helps. What would you say is like the biggest challenge, or like maybe something that people wouldn't think about when going off grid? Because when we think about off grid living in tiny houses, like we're kind of just given, like the pictures from like we have like HGTV episodes and like all these off grid
Yeah.
shows that make it look kind of glamorous. Like they really do sort of make it look like a really fun, like kind of like not that much of a hassle experience. Like, what do you think people would benefit from learning from your experience with being off grid?
Yeah. I think that a ton of research is needed to make sure that you um, have the right amount of power for your house. The
Mhm.
number one thing that anyone needs to do if they're going to go off grid is sit down and think about, if I want to have a comfortable life, what is it that I'm going to be using all the time? Do I need to blow dry my hair? Or do I need to microwave my popcorn? Like, what is it that I can't live without if you want to have a
Mhm.
comfortable life? And then tally up all those numbers and make sure that that number is at least how much power you're going to have in the batteries for your house. Um, Taking into consideration where you live and the climate. Like for me, I live in Canada, so it's always cold most of the time. So we don't have a lot of sun power in the winter. So you have to think about backup power and how much power that backup power needs to be to power your entire house. And as of recent, I've learned that when the generator is running, that is a big power draw too. So you have to take that into consideration on top of just running your house. There's a lot to think about. So doing your research, um, adding everything up, finding the right people to help install all of that for you. And then in Ontario, because it's tiny homes are still pretty new, the
Mhm.
insurance companies kind of they view tiny homes as an RV, and you can't have like a wood burning stove and a moving vehicle, right?
Gotcha.
So we can't have that here. I know in other places where they're more well known and accepted could have a wood burning stove, but not here. So there's all sorts of
That
different
makes
things
sense.
to consider. Yeah.
Yeah. No, the insurance piece, that's a really important one too. I mean, the power one's huge, right? Like I was at Tiny Fest a couple of weeks ago and like you see all the
Mhm.
solar companies and like solar panels, it's trendy, but like I know nothing about solar energy. Most people know nothing about it. So that would be a huge learning curve for a lot of people. I
Yeah.
know some companies will give you like will come with a certain amount of energy, but it's not enough. So like people don't realize that when they buy their tiny house, maybe like the hookups that are coming with it or what comes with the tiny house is actually not enough to power everything,
Yeah.
especially if you work from
Yeah.
home. You're doing a lot. Maybe you have kids. You do laundry like every 3 days. So
Yeah.
that's a big one. Yeah. With the
Huge.
insurance one
Yeah.
that you mentioned with the insurance piece, that's a really important
Mm.
because a lot of people don't understand tiny house insurance at all. I just had someone on the channel who actually owns a tiny house insurance company, and so he was able to talk about like
Mm.
all the different types. And he mentioned what you were talking about with the RV insurance versus tiny house insurance. Um, how does that work for you in terms of like when you move it and things like that? Like, is it that they see your tiny house as basically like something that's constantly could be moving? Is that the issue?
Well, that's it because it's on wheels.
Mm-hmm.
That's where everyone's mind goes, and they think that it's like a trailer that you just drive around willy nilly. But tiny homes, really, you can't just drive them. I've seen people drive them around, but they'd have to be pretty small to do that. Like for a 40-footer like
Mm-hmm.
mine, there's no way you can drive it around. So it's been frustrating for me that I just park it and I never move it, and I hope I don't ever have to move it. That the insurance companies consider my tiny home to be a vehicle when I it's just parked here. I don't move it.
No, that's interesting. Maybe I think it's maybe just like they don't understand, and I feel like
Yeah.
since they don't understand, they'll quote it at like they do like a comparison, like, well, the closest thing I could think of this being, but they really are
Yeah.
two very completely things. I think that's a huge misconception for people that don't understand the industry is that RVs and tiny houses are similar at all. They're really not. They're
Yeah.
not built the same. They don't travel the same. Like
Exactly.
there's a lot more issues around like weight and stuff like that too. So it's very
Yeah.
different. A very different classification, but yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And a cost to insure an RV is going to be very expensive, right? Versus just
Mhm.
getting apartment insurance, for example. it's a lot more expensive. So that's been a challenge. The other challenge with insurance is that like you said, insurance companies don't understand tiny homes, so
Hmm.
they look at tiny homes as a humongous risk because your house is on wheels and you're driving it around. What if the house falls over? What
Yeah.
if, who knows, whatever, all sorts of crazy stuff. And they take that into consideration, and it's hard to get tiny home insurance here. I don't know about other places, but it is hard to get.
Hmm. That makes sense. Hopefully
Yeah.
hopefully it'll like evolve over time. I do feel like a
Yeah.
lot of things need to sort of like catch up to where people are at because people are really sort of taking to the tiny house movement pretty quickly, especially lately. And I
Mm.
think the pandemic is a big part of that too. So and the housing market too. I know the housing market in Canada is kind of similar to the housing market in places in the US. Like I know Toronto in particular you mentioned is like just there like it's wild. Like I've seen some things
Yeah.
with real estate in Toronto. Like I know that that's just like growing really, and it's like super expensive there too. So yeah, no,
Yeah.
I think it makes sense. Hopefully they'll adapt.
I think they
Yeah.
will. Tiny homes are becoming more recognized here, so it's
Mhm.
hopefully just a matter of time. For the longest bit, anyone with a tiny home in Ontario, you're kind of sneaking around and looking to see where you can park your house where no one will notice you, kind of thing. Even the like the trailer parks, they don't want tiny homes there. But now everything's changing, and Ontario has made bylaws that allow for tiny homes. Tiny homes on wheels are still a gray area uh, because the bylaws state that they want something with a permanent foundation that's hooked up to
Mhm.
septic. But, most people who want to live in a tiny home want to have kind of the adventure of taking their house somewhere and parking it and homesteading and living off grid and having the compost toilet and the hooking up to a well and all of that stuff. They don't want the septic thing. They want the
Right.
adventure. Yeah, they want to be
Yeah.
close to nature.
I see why too. I think, it's pretty clear to see the benefits of being able to do that and just feeling a sense of home, but also feeling like you have more control over things because when you're living in an apartment or a townhouse, even if you buy your house in a neighborhood where there's an HOA, like there's just a lot of things you can't do. So I see where people would be excited about just going off grid, getting a rain catchment system, dealing with it
Yeah.
doing all the things themselves. I see where that would be
Yeah.
exciting for people.
Yeah. The thing I like about off-grid is it's kind of like make growing your own food and eating organic. You know where your water comes from. You know what's in your water.
Mhm.
You have the power through your own filtration systems to make sure that that is clean, pure water that you're taking in. Um, yeah, and it's coming from the well, or some people get water tanks, but I have a well. Yeah, and that everything's clean, and I like knowing that.
Yeah.
It's comforting.
I bet. Yeah. I mean, you
Yeah.
put the time and the investment in it. I mean, you should feel comfortable in it, and I think that that's definitely possible with how much things have changed now. What
Yeah.
advice would you give to someone who wants to buy a tiny house? Like they know nothing. Maybe they're thinking, I want to buy a tiny house and move off grid somewhere like you've done, or like they're just really interested in it, but they have no idea where to start. What advice would you give them?
Definitely make sure that you again do your research about where it is
Mhm.
that you are thinking of parking and what the city bylaws are around that. The worst thing that you would ever want is to park your house somewhere and then someone from the city comes along and says, "Oh, you can't park here. You're not properly zoned or permitted or whatever." And then you put all this time and effort into it, and then you have to move or you have to leave your home. And that's the last thing anybody would want. So you need to make sure you've got all your ducks in a row, you've done your research, and made whatever calls you need to make sure that you're legally parking somewhere. I think that's
Mhm.
number one. The first thing that even my builder said was you have to find a parking space first before you even look
Right.
at the tiny home that you want to build. Find a parking space first and
Yeah.
make sure you have that secured. So that's, I guess, the big one. And then the other part, like I said, is to take into consideration where you live, and what the climate is like, what is going to be required. Like, I've made a lot of tiny home friends since I have a tiny home now, and I have tiny home friends that live in the desert, and it's a totally different environment for them than it is for me, where winter happens, and you need to make sure that your house is very well insulated. Uh, that you have enough, like I said, you have enough power and heat for a tiny home in the winter in Canada. And
Hmm.
if you wanted to live in say you were looking at a trailer park or a tiny home community in Canada, in Ontario, a lot of bylaws state that they don't want you somewhere whole year round, because of the winter and how much liability that could be for your home. So all of those things you have to take into consideration. Making sure that you find a good builder, do your research, ask around, definitely talking to a lot of other tiny home people. Tiny home people want to help other people to
They do.
know what they're getting
For sure.
into, I find.
Yeah.
So they're always happy and willing to talk to you. What else? I think I think that's it. Just making sure that you've done your research to make sure you have everything you know you're going to need to do this. And also know whatever you think it costs, it's going to cost more because
Hmm.
you have to
Yeah.
think about, again, preparing the land for you to be on, um, whether that's digging or getting a concrete pad or whatever it is, you got to think about that. And especially if you're off grid, whatever you think you needed to be off grid, you're going to need more. So more panels, more batteries, more. So what are the costs of those things? And make sure you have those things. So the last thing you want is to get your beautiful tiny home set in place and you're living there and then find out you don't have enough. So you need to have
Mhm.
those funds ready and available. Sorry, ready and available.
Mhm. I think that's really great advice because I think like doing your research is huge because there is so much information out there. It's
Yeah,
really important that you figure out how to sift through all of it and maybe even talk to someone. I think people that live in tiny houses, in my experience, everyone in the industry is super friendly. So like there is an opportunity now that maybe there wasn't like 5 or 10 years ago where you can just hop on social media and like message people and reach out to them. Maybe someone's willing to talk to you. And like
yeah,
just tell you the truth. I feel like tiny house people in the tiny house industry are very honest, which I really appreciate. Because
mhm,
there is kind of like too much information out there in some ways. So I think the more that you can learn beforehand, it saves you time and it saves you money because I feel like it can get really expensive otherwise. So I think that's really great advice.
mhm. I guess one more thing I just thought of. I think it's
Hmm.
important wherever you're going to park that you really scope it out. Take your time with it. Um, get to know the people if there are other people there. Get to know them. Make sure that it's somewhere that you feel comfortable, that you feel safe, that you can see yourself living there for many years and and be happy. It's important that you do your research about where you want to park and who's there as well, especially for people who are more diverse. Going into like a trailer park community or something like that, you may have problems like fitting in.
Hmm.
So you have to really find the right place and get to know the people that you want, that you're going to be living around, and make sure you feel good about it.
Yeah. No, I think that makes complete sense to me because it's going to be your community, so I
Yeah,
think it should be people that you trust, especially with tiny houses because there is, I think, a little bit more like vulnerability around living in a tiny house. You're not in
yeah,
like a bigger space. So like, it is like people are going to see what you're doing. They are going to see where you live. So I think you should trust the people that you're living around. If something happens, they
yeah,
can help you out. If you go out of
yep,
town, like that your house is going to be safe. Like I think that's like excellent advice for people so that they don't just think
yeah,
like, oh, let me just find a place to park it really quick so that I can get it built, and then they
exactly.
end up living somewhere where like, and they're not easy to move, and it's not always easy to
Hmm.
find another place to put it too. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. One thing I really came into when I moved from the city, I was very private and I kept to myself. I just live in my condo and mind my business. But
Hmm.
when I came out here to live on a farm, um, you need community. You need to have people around you that understand. There's another couple that just lives a couple minutes walk from me on the farm that they're off grid as well. Like we understand what one another is going through. We understand the lifestyle. We are always watching out for each other and helping each other, because it is hard off grid, and it is hard when you're kind of isolated. Like, I live on a farm in the forest, so I'm very much, it's just me and another couple in this section in the forest. So yeah, we're very much alone, but it's important to have community even more because of that. And I don't have any pets, so I made friends with their dogs and everything. So like, if anyone's coming down the road, the dogs come barking and watching out for me. So community is very important, and I learned about that when I moved here.
Yeah. It sounds like you've
Mhm.
got like a good sort of like setup, and you've learned a lot along the way, and you've got a solid community around you too, which is really great. I think that's a really important part of it. And yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to just talk to me, and also like share with people, share with the viewers, because I think that there's a lot that you've covered in this conversation that a lot of people don't know about. So hopefully it helps sort of like dispel some of the myths around off-grid living, tiny house life in general, and makes people feel a
Mhm.
little more comfortable as they sort of like progress in whatever stage in their journey that they're in. So I appreciate you so much taking the time to chat with me.
Oh yeah, it's no problem. And if anybody, like I said, tiny people like helping people. So if
Yep.
anybody wants to ask me, I'm on Instagram at Life in a Tiny, and they can message me if they have any questions about tiny living or off grid. I'm happy to help.
Cool. Perfect. Yeah, your Instagram, like links to your Instagram will be, is in the video description, so people will be able to sort of like click on that and check out everything you're doing, and then yeah, hopefully they'll reach out if they have any questions. So awesome. Cool.
Yeah, yeah,
Thank
I'm
you.
happy to help. You're welcome.
All right, we'll talk soon.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye. All right, so that was my conversation with Kristine. I really appreciate them taking the time to talk about their experience and just giving like an honest account of what it looks like to live off grid, things around energy, things around generators, and even down to like parking your tiny house and knowing where to put it. I can't stress that enough. It is really, really important that you figure out where you're going to put it. If you have questions about that, feel free to reach out to people who have already gone tiny. You can reach out to me as well. Send me an email. I can do my best to find out information for you based on where you're living, but it's really important that you figure that out. And also check out insurance too. So just again, I cannot stress enough how important it is that you make sure that your policy is complete for you, like for your entire tiny house, no matter whether you move it or not. So also check out Mac Insurance. The link for their websites in this video description. The link for Kristine's Instagram is in this video description. You can reach out to them and send them a message. So thanks so much for watching. Got some really great stuff coming up on the channel as well too. Just continuing to interview more people who live in tiny houses, talking about sustainability and tiny house communities as well. So thank you again for watching. I appreciate you guys so much. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit subscribe, tap that notification bell so you find out when I drop new videos. I drop new videos every single week. And as always, don't forget to think tiny. I'll see you guys in the next one.